Hello, happy holidays. My name is Terry Pearson. I'm going to be reading a scary story from my new book, No More Days. You can find it on Amazon. You can find more scary stories on my page, Something Spooky. This is Quandary of Millennia. Light twisted through the glass that wasn't there and melted the flowers and leaves below, leaving stains of deep bubbling wounds that spit out chunky maleficence and singed the grass yellow. Nothing would grow there again, and the ground wasn't even fit to be buried in. It let out pungent clouds of smoke that billowed up into fog and turned the area into a misty cemetery of tree stumps and puddles of water that reached further down than was possibly possible. The glass was not from here, not from anywhere, but hung over the plot of land like film over an eye. In the last day, a rabbit, 2 deer, and countless birds had passed through its jurisdiction and had their insides burned out, not instantly, but in a way that would take a very long time and be very unpleasant. It was high up in the air above the clouds and filtered sunlight like that famous Pink Floyd album cover, but if the rainbow was microwave death rays. The clouds themselves, corrupted by the influence, spit out awful water that poisoned crops and brought bad luck and stormy weather. The glass had been there as long as it had been there and came from nowhere, but probably outer space or another dimension or something. It had no consciousness and no being and just was evil and didn't operate by any laws of our nature. It was slowly expanding, barely growing any meaningful amount in a year, but steadily stretching out further and further. One day, a princess and her suitor passed underneath its wicked gaze, and their life was changed forever. The princess bore 7 children, all of them sycophants, traitors, and liars. Most of them died by the sword or worse, and the one that managed to make it was taken by sickness as a reward. The princess aged into a mean old woman who undermined and disparaged the benevolent reign of her brother, the king. Decades later, a group of men camped under the bad sign, spending a whole night in mourning underneath the sweltering shade of the profane effect. Dozens died as a result, as with some years carrying the malignant control, each man became a murderer, butcher, or instrument of carnage. There were a half-dozen of them. Some killed for fun, some served in war. One was a sadist who tortured and skinned his victims and worn their scalps as hats. Much later, a new road that would turn them into a major trade route passed underneath the glass in the sky. All of that cargo and all of those travelers inherited the hex and carried their bundle of burden with them to unlucky destinations. It was like an artery that pumped poison across the land. More lifetimes passed, and the area around the road slowly developed until it suddenly burst into a bloom of civilization. Homes, businesses, parks, a whole village blossomed under the ancient invisible barrier. The town was called Oxton, and it was doomed from inception, a wicked root to the thing in the sky. It was a place of murders and heartbreak, where everyone turned their back on each other and no one had a friend. It was a sad, dreadful place that seemed to always be under cloud cover while sticky with heat and rain, where dreams died if they were ever born at all. Nothing good came out of Oxton, and no one made it out alive, not without carrying and spreading a portion of the toxin like an infected shuttle. A century later, Oxton erupted into fire and blood when a third of the population, brainwashed by false prophets, ran through the streets in sheets smeared with guts. They carried long, slender knives that they plunged deep in the bellies of unsuspecting neighbors and then wiped off on their grisly aprons. Chewing flesh and wearing skin, they toppled the corrupt authorities, and Oxton became a shadowy den of cannibals and cultists. The glass in the sky kept shining malevolence, unrelenting in its concentrated dosage. It was like sun on burnt skin, drilling in further and peeling back even more with the continuous exposure. It did not think that the city had endured enough. It wasn't even capable of it, so it kept pouring more on to the lifeless corpse. Eventually, Oxton was nearly desolate, abandoned and crumbling, with pockets of gangs and nefarious, barely human stragglers who would hide deep in the darkness of the old buildings and houses and chew your face off as soon as look at you. Far and wide, it was known as a cursed place, the haunted city, and word had spread that if you just passed through its shade shadows, it would follow you home. Everyone avoided it and was left to rot and sink into the ground. As the outside world progresses, Oxton stayed frozen in time, a blight on the region and ashamed of the shared history of humanity. Finally, what was left of it was razed, every last structure demolished, and individual evicted. The site was now to be a military base. This detestable stretch of reality, home to countless atrocities and acts of barbarism, was now going to hold soldiers and fighter jets and guns and bombs. It was sliced up and fenced off. New buildings and barracks were built. New roads and lots were paved. but all of it under the same glare that had burrowed into Oxdon until it burst out like pus from a lanced boil. The glass in the sky had kept growing, expanding its border over centuries, gradually extending over more land and people, bringing more sorrow and suffering. It was imperishable, undetectable, unknowable, and without cause or reason. It pushed its misery as naturally as bees build a hive and would never be stopped, recognized, or understood. It released misfortune like a storm pissing rain, mocking reality and fate, filtering existence into waves of damnation. That was Quandary of Millennia from No More Days. Thank you. Happy holidays.